Welcome, everybody, to The Thoughtful Bro. I'm here with the fabulous, the in-demand, the best-selling TJ Newman. We're going to get to TJ and her fabulous new book. Is it fabulous or is it just outright terrifying? Fabulous new book. We'll say fabulous new book, worst case scenario, in a minute. But first, a few words of intro. The Thoughtful Bro is here every Tuesday at 2 to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. A Mighty Blaze, if you haven't heard of us, we've been around for about 4 years, connecting writers to readers virtually through COVID and now beyond COVID. At A Mighty Blaze, we're never asking for money. If you want to show us the love, you can follow us, like us, tell your friends about us, retweet us. And I have another idea for you. If you are in the mood to spend money, please spend it on books that are white knuckle, hair raising, edge of your seat. This one goes to 11 thrillers. Books like Worst Case Scenario by TJ Newman. We're going to put some links to buy that in the chat and support indie bookstores through bookshop.org. So please go ahead, open a browser tab and buy Worst Case Scenario for yourself and all your friends. Just don't give it to them right before they get on a plane. That's my only pro tip for you with any TJ Newman book. If you want to ask TJ a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat and we will get to it at the end of the show. A little bit more about TJ Newman. If you don't know about TJ Newman, which I bet you do, TJ Newman is a former bookseller and flight attendant whose first novel, Falling, became a publishing sensation and debuted at number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. Her second novel, Drowning, The Rescue of Flight 1421, was an instant New York Times bestseller. Newman's books have been published in 35 countries and will soon be major motion pictures. She is back now with her third novel, Worst Case Scenario. The hook is killer, as always. When a pilot suffers a heart attack at 35,000 feet, a commercial airliner filled with passengers crashes into a nuclear power plant. James Patterson calls Worst Case Scenario, quote, a chilling idea with great characters and near perfect execution. And the LA Times calls TJ Newman, quote, Hollywood's most valued disaster novelist. TJ Newman, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you. That was quite the intro. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. And I finished Worst Case Scenario over the weekend. I wonder, the great irony of this book, and I'm sure I'm not like the first person to make this joke, is that like it is like the classic airplane read that you just cannot ever read on an airplane. So it's sort of like more like the cruise ship read or something. It's just like, I mean, people must make this joke all the time. Like this is like the great airport read that don't ever bring on an airplane.
Everybody says that, but I'm always like, I wrote the first one on an airplane. So to me, it's the perfect setting for it, actually, because it's like, it's almost like, like a 4D ride where it's like, you're in turbulence, in real life, along with what's happening in the book. You've got the sounds, the smells, it's like the book come to life.
It's true. I was telling my wife about it, and I was like, we're about to go on a trip in a couple of days. And she's like, don't tell me we're about to go on a flight. And I'm like, sweetie, listen, what are the chances that I'm going to tell you about a plane crashing? And then you're going to get on a plane that crashes. There's like no chance that would happen. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. The odds just aren't there. Yeah.
The odds just aren't there. Anyway, if I'm ever in a TJ Newman book, I'm never going to get on an airplane. That's for sure. Now, listen, I want to start with sort of your background and then kind of talk about how you got to where you are, because I think it's so interesting. It's something that everybody talks about. And I just want to dig into it a little bit more. So, as you just mentioned a moment ago, you wrote this book or started to write this book on an airplane, and you were a flight attendant at the time. And like the thing that everybody kind of always says about you is like the story is you're like this flight attendant who just made it. But I mean, I think the thing about you is like once you start like reading about you and where you came from and how, you were in theater and you were trying to be an actress in New York. And then, you moved home and you worked at an indie bookstore. I mean, you were always on the road to storytelling, right?
100%. I think, a lot of times people hear, what happened with me, and because it came out of nowhere, because I wasn't established and it was just like all of a sudden, boom, I think there was the easy temptation to think, oh, an overnight success, and it's like, sure, I'm an overnight success that took like nearly 2 decades to get here. Yeah. As you said, I spent some time in New York pursuing theater. I went to college for musical theater, and after I got that degree, I did what you do with the degree in musical theater. You move to the city and you be the starving artist, and you take the train into the city early in the morning, do your auditions, go to your day job, which for me was well, there was lots of things, but I was a waitress, I was a nanny, I was, the person in Times Square that passes out the flyers for the Disney on Broadway shows.
Mm-hmm.
That was me. And after a few years of doing that and getting just nowhere, I packed up and moved home and moved back to Phoenix and moved in with my parents, and then did the whole, I'm in my mid 20s with a degree in musical theater, and I was just told by the musical theater community that I couldn't hack it. What am I going to do with my life now? Which anybody who's done anything like that knows it is not fun. And it was at that point that my mom suggested, you should get a job at Changing Hands bookstore up the street. I'm a lifelong reader, lifelong writer, and she thought it would be, a good way for me to get back into worlds that are creative, surrounded with people who thought like me and were interested in things that I was interested in, and see where it took me. And as they say, and as I am willing to admit, listen to your mother. Your mother's always right. And that was the absolute best advice, ever. I got a job there and I was home. I was with people, like I said, who were interested in the things that I wanted to do. And that was books, that was stories. And being surrounded by books and talking about books and watching book events and seeing authors come in, that was the point at which my sort of lifelong dream of being a published author turned into a concrete goal. And yeah, so I did that for a while. And then a job came up that made me an offer I couldn't refuse. My mom's a flight attendant. My sister is a flight attendant, and the family business called. I got a job as a flight attendant with Virgin America, and left for San Francisco for training, and fell in love with the industry. I mean, you can read my books, especially the first book, and see that they are nothing but a love letter to aviation. I love it. I can wax romantic all day long, or 3 books long for sure. I love it. I love the people. I love the magic of it. I love everything about it. And the stories and inherent drama that come with that just readily became very obvious to me every day at work. And so that's when I had the first idea for my first book, Falling. I started writing it on the plane by hand in the forward galley. And it took a long time and a lot of drafts to get to where, I thought like I think this is a book. I think this is as far as I can take it. I'm going to now see if I can get an agent, because that's what you need. You need a literary agent. I didn't know that. I had to figure that out. But once I figured out that's the first step, I wrote my query letter and started, submitting to agents, and 41 rejections later, I'm really, doubting that any of this is going to happen. And maybe it's a more stupid book than I thought that it was. And, 41 agents can't be wrong. I'm clearly the one in the wrong here. But I submitted, I kept going, and my 42nd submission was my one and only yes. And that's the agent that I have. And as they say, the rest is history.
Oh my gosh. All right. So there's so much there in that amazing story. But I mean, first, like I began with that question, it's like, actually your story sounds like a lot of stories. It's like sort of, it happened to be that you're a flight attendant, and certainly that's the unusual part, because there's not a lot of flight attendants who make the transition. But I would just say that, like, the kind of struggling through different creative pursuits, and kind of an adjacent creative pursuit, and then moving over into writing, it sounds like kind of a lot of people I know. But I want to just dig in for a second on the flight attendant stuff, because I do think it's so interesting. So one story I want to tell you is that when I was a senior in college, I was like realizing that I really had to get a job pretty soon. And so I went to my career services office at my college, and I like took this questionnaire that was like, it was like, fill out kind of a personality profile, and then we'll tell you some careers that might be fitting for you. And I was like, so I turned the thing in, and I'm like, fingers crossed, like, surgeon or like, general or president or something, right? And they were like, flight attendant. That was like number one, flight attendant. And it must have been that at that time I had this real wanderlust. So I have no idea what it was. Maybe I like wrote that I wanted to travel a lot, but maybe there was something deeper, and there's some Venn diagram between flight attendants and novelists.
It's a certain personality. Look, you either, when you get hired as a flight attendant, you find out real fast if the job works for you or it doesn't. And it's not one of those wishy-washy. It is very clear very quickly. Mm-hmm. And the personalities that usually fit well with it, they're people, which I can tell you fall into that category. They're conversationalists. They're usually right-brained, emotional, creative people who can look at big pictures and see how within the big pictures, how each of the small parts, because that's a crew, right? And that's managing a flight and all of the small components of what has to happen. They're multitaskers. I mean, this is sort of describing storytelling and being a novelist, right? Is figuring out how all these pieces interplay and work together. Yeah, I think you'd be a great flight attendant.
I appreciate that. But another thing it's about, and I think this is really like what I see in your books, is that it's a lot about problem solving, right? I mean, you got to think on your feet as a flight attendant, right? And there's all kinds of things that come up and you got to solve those problems. And your books are just like page after page of somebody facing sort of an impossible, intense situation and having to make a choice. So I see that in it too. And on that note, I actually wanted to ask you, like, is there, like, going back to your days as a flight attendant, was there ever like an extremely scary, like TJ Newman like moment? Or alternatively, was there like ever some crazy flight attendant situation that you had to deal with? Like, I'm looking for a good anecdote.
I will say there was never, thankfully, a TJ Newman style problem, because once you hit like TJ Newman level of problems,
it's over.
You would have heard about it on the news, right?
Yeah.
So thankfully I never had a problem like that. But yeah, virtually every flight there is some kind of inciting incident that is a drama that has to be solved by the end of the flight. And I realize now in hindsight, not at the time, but I realize now that I think being a flight attendant really trained my mind in a lot of ways to think in that sort of story arc, right? Every flight is a beginning, middle, and an end.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah.
Right. So no matter what the conflict is in there, you've got a cast of characters that are with you.
Yep.
I mean, half of them are in costume. There's lines to be said. There's going to be some sort of inciting incident of conflict that has to be resolved by the people that you're surrounded with by the end of a certain period of time. Mm-hmm. I always said it's a very theatrical experience in that way, which, as you know, my background was in theater. Like I really had a lot of creative fulfillment from that job. And it wasn't until way down the road into this career that I was like, oh, not just from like the performance and participatory aspect of it, but the like storytelling aspect of it too. It was excellent training.
Yeah. All right. I want to put something up on the screen here, which is one of the most famous napkins in literary history, I want to say. So those on the podcast will not be able to see this, what I'm talking about, but I'm going to describe it to you. So this is a Virgin America napkin. It's got the Virgin America logo on it. And there's a bunch of notes here that TJ wrote, including right in the middle in big letters, impossible choice, the family or the passengers, which is the heart of TJ's first book, Falling. But there's also some other great stuff on here that I want to sort of dig into for a moment. One is at the bottom, it says emotion versus logic. And then in the top right, I see pacing in all capital letters. And I feel like this is like some sort of like kind of hack. I mean, this is like sort of like the kind of like hack into the mind of TJ Newman. And it's like, I just feel like so many of the core elements of who you are as an author are on this napkin. So like, let's just start with like, first of all, like, do you remember where exactly you were when you wrote this?
100% in the forward galley. Yeah. You can even see the coffee stain right there on the side. Yeah. I wrote that on the plane while, working this out in my head, like, what does this need to be? And it's funny, I've never thought about it in that sort of framework, but you're right. This is basically my first novel's North Star. This
Totally.
is, what is this story about? And
Mhm.
it's about emotion versus logic. It's a man in an impossible, predicament. Does he save his family, which is the emotional side of things, or does he go with duty and save the passengers, which is the logic side of things? And
Mm.
it's a really difficult problem for a pilot, because a pilot is trained. It is part of the pilot training is compartmentalization, is to understand that emotion has no place in the cockpit. Emotion it just is not a part of flying an aircraft. And
Mhm.
he is put in a position to where he has no choice except to confront um, those opposing forces. Um, yeah, and pacing that's been the North Star, which is funny that it's like up in the corner and kind of highlighted, because that's like it's so funny the way things work out. It's like a reminder to self of like, this goes with everything you do. Pacing
Yeah.
is not just for this story. This is going to be for any story you ever tell. The pacing has to be nonstop. It has to go from page one to the last sentence. There is no slowing of the pace. And I think that was something I knew from a very early point of writing these books, of just, the reader has to be with you from the first sentence to the last sentence, and the pace can't let up the whole time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I always say that to people. If I think that there's like one thing that best-selling storytelling has in common, pacing is it. I think and it's not even necessarily like a breakneck pace. I mean, your pace is faster than most, but actually what it is, I think, is a consistent pace, right? It's like that it's not lumpy.
To me, I think of it in musical terms.
Mm.
You don't I'm not writing heavy metal, right? That is like nonstop the whole time, just like going,
Yep.
going, going. If you listen to like a great sweeping, soundtrack score, that was no, by the way, if there's any heavy metal fans out there, that wasn't a dig. It's great. That was not a dig at heavy metal. I'm just saying, pacing does not mean like a metronome, just going, going, going as
Yeah.
fast as you can. It's about attention. I think of it more as attention, and how do you not break the spell of attention for the reader? And the
Mm.
pacing in that, if you go breakneck for the entire time, if it's nothing but action and nothing but chaos, then the reader's going to be exhausted, and they're not going to keep up, and it's not going to be an enjoyable read. You're going to
Mm.
lose them, because they're just going to, it will be one note. So part of pacing is also understanding when you need that break, when you do
Mm.
need to slow it down, when you do need to have more of a character development, an emotional scene, what is that pacing? And I try to think of it in musical terms. And I listen to a lot of scores to go along with movie soundtracks, because they do that so well.
Mm. Yep, I love that. I think that's totally right. You've said it so beautifully. I mean, I guess before I take this napkin off the screen, what's remarkable to me about this napkin, it's funny. I used to be a reporter covering entrepreneurship and like venture capital and stuff. And there's a lot of kind of legendary stories in Silicon Valley about like, billion-dollar businesses that were started on a napkin over drinks, right? And so here it's like sort of reminded me of that kind of thing. But what's so interesting about this is that it isn't like, oh, like did the but it's like the butler killed him, but then he's still alive or whatever. It's not like a plot thing that's on here. I mean, you do have the family or the passengers, but truly it is. I mean, it's like, what's interesting to me is like the state of mind you must have been in when you were writing this, because it's not just like here's my idea, but it's like you writing a note to yourself saying here's the idea and here's how I'm going to do it, and here's like the kind of emotional underpinning of it with this emotion versus logic. I mean, it is sort of like a business plan in a sense. I don't want that to sound the wrong way, but it's like it's a greater vision than merely the plot. What I'm saying,
I totally understand what you're saying. And I personally feel for these types of stories, or with starting a business, or with an invention, this is such a universal concept that I think really applies to stories like this. If you can't distill it down to something that can fit on a napkin in just a few
Mm-hmm.
words, then you may need to rethink it. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like, the
Mm-hmm.
more simple,
Mm-hmm.
the best, but here's what I'll say. To me, the best story idea, the best pitch that I've ever heard, the one that I go, God, I would have given anything to have had that idea,
Yeah.
is Jurassic Park.
Mm.
And to me, you can distill that down to 3 words: dinosaurs come back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You say those 3 words and you've got an entire concept that just blows your mind wide open. And I think for me and for these types of stories, the more simple you can make it, if I can't get the concept down on a napkin, I'm probably going to run into problems when I'm trying to tell the whole story.
Okay, and yet, TJ, like, there's a lot of great hooks out there, right? I mean, and there's like, I have friends who write short stories that get picked up for TV shows. I mean, some of them actually, I have this one friend who actually, I don't know what this is called in Hollywood, but it's like they actually just write kind of like 4 or 5. They can sell something that's 4 or 5 sentences long. It's like purely the pitch you can sell, and it's different to be able to write a pitch and actually to be able to execute on a whole book, which is something you're able to do. So actually, like, my next question to you is about that, which is that, like, okay, great. You clearly have a knack for the high concept pitch, but then you're also able to put a full flesh and blood novel under it. And I guess my question to you about that is, like, is that something that you had to learn? Did you just feel like kind of fleshing out very catchy hooks is something that you were just born with, or what?
I think it's so funny when we talk about my journey to get here, my 20 some year journey to get here. It's like, Falling was not the first story idea I had. It was not the first book I wrote. It was not, the first thing that I tried. It definitely was not. It was the concept that sort of put the light bulb on and go, that's it. That's the one. That's the story that I need to tell and figure out. I think once I figured that out, and ever since then, it's been a honing of that sort of vision and how I see things. I think, these are the books and the movies that I've always loved, that I grew up reading and watching, and these are those stories. And I think it wasn't until I found what my unique voice was and what my unique angle was that I was able to kind of narrow that focus into napkin size, right?
Yeah.
Until then, it's as you should, which is a vital part of anything, is, you try everything. And even that book, once I had the concept, it took me, nearly 40 drafts to get that book to the final form that it was in. And each of those drafts was like a monumental change. It was, it's practice. All of it, I think, is practice. And that, I think, goes also for coming up with ideas. You were very generous in saying, that I can come up with concepts and can do this. It's like, that's only because I've really, you come up with a lot of terrible stuff too,
Yeah.
and it's only because I've really worked on training my brain to see stories in that type of way that the ideas start to come. It's like that phrase. What's that turn of phrase? The muse will come, but it has to find you working.
Yeah, totally.
It's like the ideas come once I've been constantly thinking in those terms and constantly looking at the world in those terms.
I just think from like the way that creativity is talked about, what's so interesting about that napkin is that, like, it can appear to the untrained eye to be something that is the beginning of something, to be something that is like a flash of insight out of the blue, right? But actually, the napkin is the end of something. To me, it's the end of a very long process where you tried a zillion different things, nothing is working, and it's sort of finally your brain just clicks in and it's like, now I've solved it. It's like the end of that whole process of experimentation. And now it's the beginning of something else, indeed. But it's also the end of you in this kind of searching wilderness phase, trying to find your voice and your style.
Absolutely. When I was, during that period of time when I was, living in my childhood bedroom, in my 20s and figuring out what to do with the rest of my life, I tried a little bit of everything. I tried a little bit of everything. And I remember I took a seminar in entrepreneurship at the Phoenix Public Library. And I remember that the person that was teaching it gave the example of a pizza parlor, using it for the idea of should you start a business? And they use the example of a pizza parlor, and it's like, starting a restaurant is expensive and risky and incredibly hard, and the fail rate is very high. Why is the pizza that you are going to make why should someone go buy your slice of pizza and not the other guy's? And if you don't have a good answer for that, is it really worth it to spend the time and energy and money and pain and heartache that goes into, starting a small business? And I remembered that when I was writing everything, and I think everything that I was writing, I don't think passed the pizza test. I've never thought about it like that, but it's like, it didn't pass the pizza test. Like, why should someone pick up this way? There's a million books to read, and most of them are awesome. Why should someone spend their money and their time and their energy with this story? And it wasn't until Falling that I was like, that's the story. That's the story. And it's a story that I uniquely can bring to market with my experience in life, my lived experience, and my worldview. I can tell this story. And I think every writer has that story for them. What is it? If somebody else who wasn't a flight attendant, who wasn't these things, and I'm not saying only write what you know, that's not what I'm saying at all, but this story told by someone else might not have landed in the same way. And I think every writer, every creative has that personal angle of, what is my singularly unique lived experience? What can I bring to a story to put out there? And I think that those stories are usually where you find kind of where you need to go as an artist.
So beautifully said. And if it just sounds like, if I'm trying to kind of distill what you just said into kind of like, what's your pizza slice? Definitely authenticity has something to do with it, right? I mean, you sort of just said it, but at the risk of making you repeat yourself, like, if you could just, what is your pizza slice? Give me a sentence. I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
One sentence? Boy, I don't know. High concept, edge of your seat, big emotional human stories of regular people doing extraordinary things.
Ooh.
That's kind of my wheelhouse. That's kind of how I look at the world. And it sounds fine, but like, that's how I see aviation. That's how I see being a flight attendant. That's how I see so many, my book that's coming out, Worst Case Scenario, like, it takes place on the ground, and it centers around firefighters and the people, on the ground who are saving the day. It's not about a flight crew. It's about the people on the ground. That's how I see those roles as well. I see that is my worldview. As I look around at the everyday people and I go, that's a hero. They don't know it. They haven't been put in the position yet that they have discovered it. But if they were put into it, that's a hero right there. And that's just the guy that's standing next to you in the grocery store line. And I'm constantly thinking like that. I did it on the plane all the time. It's like, you got this group of people with you. What if something happens? What personalities are going to show up? What's going to do this? Well, it's the same thing. Next time you're at the grocery store, look at the person next to you in line and think, okay, if something goes down right here, right at this moment, what is that guy going to do? What do I think that woman over there, how's she going to react if let's say we're standing here and something falls through the ceiling? What is she going to do? And just start playing those games in your mind. And I don't know, I pair that with kind of like my undying belief that people are good inside. And I don't know, it comes up with some pretty fun stories.
Well, I mean, TJ, like, I think that you had just hit on like kind of like the secret, like, beating heart of why, one of the reasons why you've been such a success. I mean, I think that, like, it's not just that you have all these ideas about pacing and impossible choices, which are just like kind of great storytelling kind of principles, but it's like, it's your vision of people. It's that, like, you see the hero in people. And I mean, I think that, like, people feel that. I mean, I feel that as your reader, that, like, without you even having said that, even if you had asked me, what does TJ Newman think about people? I would have told you that TJ Newman thinks people are good and heroic. And, like, that's what I see in your books. And I just think, like, I get all stirred up reading your books. And I say that just to say that, like, kind of how do you go from hook to the book? Well, I think you've got to have, you got to have a soul to do it. And, you got to have something you want to say about people. And you really do.
Absolutely. And also it's like I write big, massive action thrillers. Explosions are cool. Car crashes, action sequences are awesome. I love them. 300 pages will not be sustained by explosions and car crashes. There has to be more. There has to be the people involved, and there has to be a real, genuine human stakes, or else we don't care. Twisters is everywhere right now, and Twister is one of my favorite movies of all time. It, by the way, has like 6 to 8 Easter eggs for Twister in worst case scenario. But you look at that and it's like, yeah, it's a movie about tornadoes. No, it's not. It's a movie about Bill and Joe and if they're going to get back together. That's what that story is actually about. Bill and Joe, by the way, the main characters from the book Falling. So I love Twister. So, even these like massive things, they're about people. They're about heart. They're about relationships. They're about that.
I love that. I want to skip to an essay that you wrote for Deadline magazine, I think. We're going to put a link to it in the chat, but it's called An Open Letter to Dreamers, and you published it a few years ago on the occasion of your second book, Drowning, coming out. And it's an essay that got a lot of play, and certainly in creative circles, a lot of writers were talking about that essay. It was very inspirational to a lot of writers. And it's just about how you continued following your dream, and then, your dream of being a kind of world famous storyteller came true. And I just want to quote just a few sentences from that. So this is from the Deadline piece, Open Letter to Dreamers. This is the part where I would normally say, I never dreamed of something like this happening to me, but I did. I did dream, and dreams are important. They're what keeps us going, and my dreams kept me going. I'm writing to you because I wish someone would have shown me a story like this after my first or second or third round of failures, when I was ready to give up, when I was wondering why I was ever so foolish to think that my dreams could come true. Before I ask you a question about that, I just want to ask you, like, did you get a lot of feedback about that essay? Could you tell that it was sort of an important thing to put into the world?
It completely caught me off guard how well received that piece was received, and how deeply it resonated with people. That piece is maybe one of the things I'm most proud of writing. I think because of how well received it was, and how much I think I needed to sort of have that camaraderie with fellow dreamers. From this side, I think I needed to hear that, even, and to hear that it has been so well received by people who said, I read that and I didn't give up. I decided to keep going. I was close to just doing what I did, packing up, moving back home in with my parents. To think that might have helped someone keep going, it was incredibly, it really meant a lot. And I meant every word of that piece. And I wrote it, like I said, because it's the message I needed at that point. And I do think it's important to show not just the success and not just the books and the movie deals and all this, to say, like, yeah, it took a long time to get here, and there were no guarantees. And it wasn't until the very end that the rest of it made sense. I had no clue that I would end up here. And to know that, because when you're in the midst of it, when you're in the middle of it, it's just hard and it's just painful. And it's not till the very end that it was like, the relief of, okay, I did it. And to let other people know that, like, that pain, that's part of the process. I've been there too. This was not easy. This did not just come. So don't think you're doing it wrong. Keep going. That's how it is.
So the essay was so beautiful. We linked to it. I recommend everybody read it right after you finish watching this interview. But there's something subtle that I want to talk about chasing your dreams, and about your story, and about this essay. So, right at the top of the show, we were talking about how you were an actress in New York, and that didn't work out. And then you moved back home, and as you said, in your 20s, living in your parents' house. I mean, that is like, everybody who's been 20 and lived in their parents' house has sort of thought to themselves, like, am I truly going to be a failure to launch and all that? You really went through it. And then you also went on and wrote some other books, and we haven't quite heard about that yet, but, had some ideas maybe that didn't work out before you reached the success of Falling. So here's what I want to ask you about is like, what if you had gotten the open letter to dreamers, you had personally received that bit of advice when you were an actress? Because you realized when you were an actress that you actually had to let go. It wasn't going to actually work out for you. And so you did move off at least one of your dreams. And you could argue that every time you move off one of your projects that doesn't quite work out, or that you don't want to complete, that's another way of sort of moving off a dream. What I feel like doesn't get talked enough about is, yes, hope. Yes, belief. I am a big cheerleader of my fellow creatives, but you also have to be flexible, and you also have to sometimes move off your dream or change your dream. And so I just wanted to ask you about that aspect of it, because you've also shown a real stick-to-itiveness, yes, but also a real willingness to pivot and do something different.
That's such a good observation and such a nuanced observation. My decision to leave New York was one of the hardest decisions that I have ever had to make, because I knew it was what I needed to do. I knew it was the right choice, but it felt like an absolute betrayal to myself and to my dreams, and to the little girl who had, sang show tunes into her hairbrush and had Broadway ambitions. That's why I was in New York. That's why I was struggling. It felt like a betrayal to that person. And it was really, really difficult to get to that point. But I recognized, and this was why I was able to make that decision, was because I knew, even though I was moving back home and I was no longer going to be pursuing that, I knew that I was not giving up on pursuing the creative work that I knew I was put on this planet to make. And the way that I was doing it then and there at that time, that wasn't it. And I knew that. But I never ever once did I stop being true to that authentic part of me that said, you are a storyteller. You are a creative person. You need to keep looking and keep figuring this out. It may not look exactly like that right now in this moment in that way, but don't you dare turn your back on who you know that you are. And I think that that's up to each individual to listen to their internal compass and know when this avenue has reached its end. I think it's important. And I knew that avenue was blocked. Then I just need to find a different way around it. I just need to find a different way around it. And that is what I kept moving forward with. And I think that sort of, to be rigid, the rigidity doesn't help. The rigidity doesn't help, but you have to hold on. You have to hold on, but not with rigidity. And that was my path of leaving New York and finding the new way into where I needed to be. And I look now and I go, this is exactly where I needed to be. And that long winding road, without being in New York, I wouldn't have wound up at the bookstore. Without being at the bookstore, I wouldn't have realized that was my path. Without going into flight attending, I wouldn't have had the idea. Without the rejection, I wouldn't have honed the story to the point to find, the right agent for me. Like, all of these steps along a long, uphill, painful path were all leading me exactly where I needed to go. So
I love that. And the deeper you dig into that story, kind of like the more inspiring it becomes, because it's just a story not only about perseverance, but about kind of, redefinition and kind of holding on to realizing what the essential thing is really at the heart of your dream, and not maybe one of the peripheral momentary manifestations of your dream, but deep down that authentic storyteller inside you. We have a bunch of questions from the audience. Thank you everybody for your questions. I'm going to spend about 5 more minutes on my questions, and we'll get to some of those. But we do actually have to talk about your third book, which is coming out. I love talking about your whole story. It's wonderful. But this book is fantastic. And it is a book about a plane that, again, never get on a TJ Newman plane in a TJ Newman novel. But it's about a plane that, this is no spoiler, crashes into a nuclear power plant. And, deep, profound chaos ensues. And I just want to say that, to me, this book is interesting kind of in your story because it's a little bit of a departure. It's like in the first 2 books, the drama is on the airplane, and, with 250 people or whatever who might die on an airplane, it's a lot of drama, right? But this is okay, that's like table stakes. That's the beginning of the story in chapter 1. Now we're going to move on to something much larger that in fact endangers the entire human species, the meltdown of a nuclear power plant. I thought that was a big step for you in the sense that here we've been talking for the last 30 minutes about you being a flight attendant and kind of nailing that thing, the airplane thriller. But this is a departure. The airplane is sort of incidental to the main drama here. And I'm just wondering, I guess my question is this a bridge to a broader kind of thriller writing for you?
I don't know that I have a good answer for that other than it's not a spoiler, to say that the plane crashes in the first 5 pages.
Yeah.
An airplane and the world of aviation is the inciting incident. It is not what this story is about. This story is about what happens after, and that's, the people on the ground. I think with this story, as soon as I came up with, when I had the idea for the story, I realized that it wouldn't be about the plane. It can't be about the plane. It's about the people on the ground, which felt like an exciting and scary challenge of, can I do that? It's such a, I had a mentor once tell me to set a cow free, you must build a fence around it. And that's always been such a good, guiding principle for me of anytime something gets too overwhelming, restrict it. A plane is a really nice way to restrict your characters and reduce their options and limit their, resources. And it makes for more interesting choices. So I was very interested in, as a writer, can I do this when it's free reign, when, you're on the ground, you have resources, you have these, everything that you would need. So I was interested to kind of try that as a writer to see, can I still do this, with a bigger world and an expanding universe for the characters that these people are in. And also it was scary, will the readers go with me? For people who, like my books for what they've been, will they go with me on this? And it's been very exciting and relieving to see that so far the responses are very positive and that people seem to be going with me. And that's really exciting because, I've got a million stories that take place on planes and in the world of aviation, because you don't do that job for 10 years and only have a few ideas. I've got plenty more, but I've got a lot of other ideas also that are, land-based, that aren't, based in that world. So I don't know. We'll see. It was kind of a toe in the water. We'll see where it goes from here.
Oh my God. It was just so interesting. I just found, along with the classic TJ Newman kind of pacey thriller stuff and the action and edge of your seat stuff, it was just so interesting about how nuclear power works and the dangers of nuclear power, the real dangers of nuclear power.
Real. You just said it right there. I think that was the thing that really caught me off guard with this book is how terrifying the research was. I do a lot of research for my books, and with this one, it became very clear very quickly that the premise for this book was entirely plausible.
Yeah.
And that was terrifying to me. And the deeper I dug into the research and the more I understood how power plants work, where they're located, what their vulnerabilities are, which you don't have to look that hard. The vulnerabilities are actually pretty obvious. It really made for a genuinely terrifying set of circumstances.
Mm.
I titled the book Worst Case Scenario, and I mean it literally. I really can't think of of a situation that would be more devastating to this country than an incident like that.
Well, folks, you have to read it. It is scary. It had me. We have 54 nuclear power plants in the United States. It's a fact I looked up all by myself because I was so scared after I finished the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the largest one is like 45 minutes from my house. So love that. But it's, you know, it's fascinating in that nuclear power plants, by design for distribution needs, they are placed near population centers. So if something does go wrong, it's not in an isolated place that we can easily quarantine and just keep going. It's literally in our backyards. They're built next to large bodies of water, most of them, because water is needed for the production process. And so therefore, if there is a contamination, all of that radioactive material is now in the water, it's in the soil, it's going through the rivers and the lakes and the tributaries and our drinking water and in our fields and the food that we eat. If something like this was to happen, the land would be unlivable for generations, which would create a mass migration issue in this country, the likes of which we've never seen. It would be a refugee crisis of American refugees on American soil. And as I was researching for this book, every single thing that I kept uncovering, just my eyes just got wider. And, you know, the in the margins of the notes, just the handwriting of the highlighting was just notes like, oh my God, no. Like it's really remarkable how terrifying the potentials of what could go wrong in a situation like this and what it could actually look like.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's going to keep me up at night. But I have one more question for you, TJ, and then we're going to take some audience questions here. You had a very heartfelt acknowledgement note to your agent, Shane. And I wanted to call that out because I think you were calling it out. I mean, you took some time to really make a point about how meaningful that relationship is to you in your acknowledgments, and about how he's kind of steered you through some real ups and downs, and just been a wonderful, I think, creative and professional partner for you. And I just wanted to turn it back to you and just ask you to talk about that for a minute and why you wanted to write that.
Absolutely. Shane was my 42nd submission, my one and only yes. And when I think back to those 41 rejections, I am grateful for each and every one of them, because I'd have gone with whoever said yes. Nobody was saying yes, so I would have gone with them. And it would have meant I wasn't with him. And he was the person I needed to be with. We see the world and we see stories in the same way. He's not just an agent. He's also a writer himself. He's a New York Times bestselling writer, and he is first and foremost a screenwriter. He got his first job was Armageddon. His most recent is he's writing the new Avatars. So we see the world in the same way, storytelling wise. So it's been amazing for 4 years to be able to talk craft and talk story with someone who sees the world the same way, but has decades of experience that he just teaches me constantly. It's been a mentorship and an education for the past 4 years that I'm just beyond grateful for. And I just know that those no's were to get me to that one yes. That was the right person that I wanted to be with, who could teach me how to do what I wanted to do well. He really helped me figure out how to do what I wanted to do as well as I could.
And let me ask you one last follow-up on that. You know, you make a point talking about how, hey, writing isn't easy and there's a lot of like false starts and dark nights and all that. Just give me one example. Give me one anecdote, one way that Shane was there for you, one bit of writing advice that he gave you, just anything from the past couple years that's just really memorable.
There's just no way. There's literally no way. I mean, we had, I wrote it, you mentioned the acknowledgments, I wrote it. It's like there's not an emotion I haven't, felt that hasn't been shot at him and sent back. It's just, I think when you do creative work and then when you try to like make it public for the world, right? All creatives know this. There's just a level of trust and friendship and intimacy that is there through that creative process. And then you go through the battle of publication and all the, tribulations of everything that brings. And, it's a real trench warfare thing we've been through for 4 years. And when you're in the trenches with someone, we have each other's backs, and that kind of, teamwork is really just, like I said, it was the one yes that I needed to get with. And none of this would have happened if I hadn't had him being such a champion for me. Cause as that self-doubt, it's there constantly. It is constantly there. And to have him since moment one just championing me and saying, no, this is going to happen, and not giving credence to that doubt. It's amazing.
It's priceless. Totally priceless. All right, let's take a few questions. This is from Kathy Lanigan. TJ, what input do you have in the movie adaptation for Falling?
I'm doing it myself. I'm adapting Falling. Actually, I'm writing the screenplay, which has been a wild process. And just talk about an education. It's learning a new language, and it's a screenplay is so different from a novel. And I think it's made me a better novelist, actually, because it forces you to focus the story on what exactly the story is. Like, how do you take a story that took 300 pages in a novel to tell? How do you tell it in 100 pages for a screenplay? And still tell the same story and get everything translated that needs to.
Which is crazy, TJ, because like you already are so focused, and it's right.
But that's what's so crazy is you said, I couldn't agree with you more. It's like, I already edited this thing down. Like there's not a spare word in this thing. How could it possibly? And then you start adapting it for the film, and it forces you to look at a scene and go, what is actually happening in this scene? What are the characters actually doing and saying? And how can I trim all of the fat? And it's really changed my novel writing, because I realized there's so much excess that actually doesn't need to be there in a story, like the types of stories that I write, which are, plot focused, really intense stories like that. It has just changed the way I look at sort of the fluff in my own writing. So so I'm adapting it, which is really has also been really cool to see. Like I said, I've wrote almost 40 drafts of that story, and so many of the story was always the same. Like the concept and the story was always the same throughout the whole thing. But the ways that I told it varied greatly. Entire storylines just gone. New storylines brought in all the way across. And it was fascinating to see that this story that was the exact same story that had so many variations, yet again can have like totally more variations than I thought could even be possible beyond the finished product that is the novel Falling. It's just been a wild, fascinating, creative journey. I've loved it.
Okay, so I have to ask a follow-up there. Like, so this is like a sort of, there's always this question that comes up among writers: when is something done? Okay, so now you wrote a book that like, and if you're saying that your books have fat on them, God help us all, TJ. But like, you're saying that you took out some fat, then you added some new things. Okay, so now let's just say, so it's going to become a movie, then the movie comes out. And let's just imagine that like somehow later they were like, well, we want to make it a TV show. And then you would go into that. And then presumably there'll be like even more stuff that you can do. And so I guess this question of like, when is something done? I mean, if you're saying something's not even done when it's a New York Times, #1 bestseller, and maybe it's not even done when it's a blockbuster movie. I mean, is something ever done? Or is there just, do stories just kind of never end?
I don't think it's a matter of being done. I think it's a matter of new ways to breathe new life into the same thing. Falling, the novel, is done, and I love that book, and I am proud of that book, and it is a finished product that I guarantee you right now, if I picked it up and had a red pen in my hand, I would be able to cover the pages with red ink of ways that I would edit that book.
Yeah.
It for me, and I think this is probably not a unique thing to creatives, I think that sort of battle is always there of and that's just like sort of, again, going to that internal compass that you just have to get better at listening to the more you do it, of is something, because that can also be a tricky thing of perfectionism, right? We just keep editing something and keep doing so. It's not right. It's not right. It's like, is that really what's going on? Or is this just like the nasty perfectionist in you that is afraid to put something out there because it's not, quote, perfect? So it's learning, for yourself, when is it, yeah, this is done. And when am I just sort of not releasing it for different reasons than what the piece is.
All right, let's take one more question and then we'll wrap here. So this is from Leslie. Does writing a book like this, is what she means, make you more worried about a terrorist attack on a nuclear reactor?
I think going into the research for this book, I was not quite as prepared for the research that I found. It shocked me. When I say that the research terrified me, I mean that pretty sincerely. There are genuine vulnerabilities that to me are pretty real. They call events like this, such as a plane crash into a nuclear power plant, they call them low probability, high consequence events, meaning there's a low probability that they're going to happen. If they do, it is a very high consequence. And that really colored all the pages of that book, is looking at what the consequences of an event like that could be.
Would you be A, happy, B, surprised if indeed your book led to some changes, like somebody thinking harder about this or something like that and making a change?
I have only one goal in any of my books, and that is to entertain. I never have, there's no aim of mine except to entertain people. But, after Falling, I can't tell you how many people came to me and said, I never knew how much responsibility flight attendants have. I never knew what their job really was. And I now have more respect for flight attendants. And that being the consequence of people reading that book, it was an unintended consequence. Nevertheless, it thrills me to know that. If anybody can read worst case scenario and go, maybe we should look at something else and maybe focus a little bit more on something here that we're not, great. Or at least on the individual level, if people can go, what would my reaction to this be? I think that's a part also of a lot of the stuff that I write, is sort of that dress rehearsal of what would I do in this situation. And I think I, as a flight attendant, am safety and security focused. And part of that is, thinking through tough situations and knowing what my response would be and how I would handle it. And I think that I like doing that for, it takes the fear out of things for me if I sort of mentally dress rehearsal it first and know what my action's going to be. Anytime I take a flight, even now, I pull out the safety information card every single time before the flight, just to review, and just so that every aircraft's different. Where is the life vest? Where's my closest exit? Where's my secondary exit? Just takes 10 seconds, just to familiarize myself. And those 10 seconds may make the difference, in the unlikely event that something does go wrong and we have to get off the plane really fast. That's sort of like my entire approach to anything. Is like, all right, if this does happen, what am I going to do about it? I don't know. I'm a survivalist at heart.
Oh my God. Are you relaxed on airplanes? Do you think you're more relaxed or less relaxed than the average person?
Oh, I think more like, because I don't have like a fear of flying.
Okay.
I don't fear flying like that. So I think I'm relaxed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the one last thing I'll say is that I had a discussion with a friend recently. There was an article going around online about why men don't read fiction, and my friend and I were talking about like, what do men? I mean, being a man and him being a man, what do we read fiction for? And maybe we have more artistic taste than like the average reader, but we did agree that like for men. There's a feeling that fiction is often about relationships and about emotions, and like the way this is broadly generalizing, but men like to think about problem solving, and men like to kind of see people in difficult situations and think, how would I handle that thing? Like, for example, they read a biography of Thomas Jefferson, like, oh, how would I have handled whatever, the Louisiana Purchase, or an assassination attempt or something, right? And so just the way men like to kind of do the exact thing that you're doing, and I'm not saying women don't do that, obviously you do, but I think that is, to me anyway, like one of the great appeals of your work is that there's not just one impossible situation, it's just like one impossible choice after another, where like the dilemma is like it's bad or worse, and you just have to go through a thought process. So I mean, I think that's one of the great engines of your work.
Thank you. And it's, it made me think when you were just saying that, it made me think of the napkin and how it said emotion versus logic.
Mm.
And then even to call back again to when we were talking about you becoming a flight attendant, and I was saying that the job description of a flight attendant is there's a lot of right-brained thinkers, and it's emotion based, and people who are looking at relationships and the bigger, how small components work in a big picture, which is the opposite of the psychological makeup of a pilot, who are left brain, analytical, logic based creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was writing Falling, and during my entire career as a flight attendant, I loved being in conversations with pilots because I would study them, because I'm like, you are a very different animal than I am. How does your brain work? Because this old bag of tears up here is comprehending things very differently than you are. And I love looking at the same problem through sort of both of those very different viewpoints. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously we're painting with very broad strokes here and making some big generalizations,
Sure.
but it's fun. I wish men would not put it in such a logical, rational, terms, because I think that they're far more emotional and right-brained and centered than they will allow themselves to think. And I kind of like, with the stories that I write, a lot of times people don't know that I'm a woman. They see TJ, they think I'm a man. Gets comments on social media all the time of like, you're a girl? Like, I thought you were a dude. Like, what? Great, that's
I
fine.
mean,
Yeah,
the picture is right there, but it's on the jacket flaps. Okay.
Maybe it was an ebook. Who knows? But who knows? But it's, I kind of like, sneak attacking. Like, you think you're gonna get nothing but explosions, but I'm gonna have you crying by the end of this book. And I think that they're not so different. They're two sides of the same coin, and they interplay with both of each other. And I hope, yeah. Anyway, I don't even think you asked me a question. I just sort of like ran with that. So sorry.
No, man, we've been running with it for the last hour. This is great. This has gone on longer than most of my shows, but I love talking to you, and this has been wonderful. TJ, we're going to wrap. I'm going to ask you one last question, which is what I love to ask everybody who comes on the show. So folks, the book is Worst Case Scenario, TJ Newman. It's wonderful. It's certainly going to be a bestseller when it comes out in a couple weeks. I recommend you grab a copy and read it in a very safe altitude, sea level place. But I would just ask you this, TJ. Imagine that there's like the perfect reader for this book, like however you imagine the perfect reader for your work, and they finish this book and they put it on their lap and they look out the window. Just describe in a phrase or even just a single word, what does that reader feel?
Ooh. How to do that without giving away the end of the book too. Ooh. I hope that they would feel community, like they were part of something, like they were part of what just happened through those pages. Community is a big theme in the book. This incident happens in a small town, and it is up to them to work together, have each other's backs, and solve this problem together.
Yeah.
And you know, that's something that people say when they read my books, is that, and I specifically write characters that are everyday people, you know, they're just people that you know. And I think that, you know, shortens the psychic distance between the reader and the character, and it makes the leap of what are they going to do to what would I do. It
Mm.
makes that leap a lot easier. And so I would hope that after they finish that, I hope that they would be left with a sense of community and knowing that they were a part of solving that problem.
I love it. That's wonderful. And sense of community is just great. And I just don't know if that's a sense of community is in enough books. So it's again, like another, I wouldn't even have thought to put it that way, like another reason why your books are so great and people just latch on to them. Wonderful stuff, insightful stuff. TJ, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you everybody online who joined. The book again, Worst Case Scenario, the third book from TJ Newman. TJ, thank you for making time for us today.
My absolute pleasure. And yes, thank you to everybody who joined us. This was wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Good luck on the book tour, TJ.
Thanks.